Pedro Sanchez stands at the edge of a quiet street in his small hometown, the late afternoon light casting a warm, golden hue over the uneven sidewalks and chipped pastel walls. At just 15, his dark hair falls over expressive brown eyes that rarely look away from the world around him. Through his camera lens, he sees patterns where others see chaos: the curve of an old lamppost, the quiet dignity in a street vendor's tired smile, the swirl of dust as kids play soccer near a weathered mural. Every detail brims with potential, waiting to be captured and immortalized in his photographs. His parents, Lucia and Miguel, watch from their modest porch. Lucia's gentle smile encourages him, while Miguel's nod of approval holds an understated pride. They know that Pedro's camera is not just a tool, it's an extension of his heart. His younger sister, Sofia, peeks out from behind the doorframe, curious and admiring. At 9 years old, she already looks up to her big brother, marveling at the way he can turn an ordinary afternoon into something timeless and extraordinary. Today, Pedro is on a mission. He's part of a local photo club set to meet at the old community center near the plaza. There, he'll proudly show his latest snapshots, images of blooming jacaranda trees set against rusted balconies, children racing homemade kites under a sky ablaze with sunset colors, and the familiar, lined faces of the elders who have watched the neighborhood change through the decades. Each photograph is more than an image, it's a piece of the town's soul, reflected through Pedro's unique perspective. As he walks through the narrow streets, he remembers the first time he picked up a camera, borrowed from Lucia's cousin who had visited years ago. That click of the shutter had ignited something within him, and since then, he's never looked at the world the same way. Now he's known around the neighborhood as El Chico de la Camara, the camera boy, welcomed by old neighbors who pose good-naturedly, teenagers who laugh and make faces, and weary workers who relax for a moment to let him capture their stories. At the community center, a small group of aspiring photographers and supportive locals gathers around a makeshift gallery of prints taped to the walls. Pedro's work stands out with its warmth and honesty. The others in the photo club, some older, some more technically skilled, take a moment to appreciate his growing talent. They comment on his unique eye, the way he frames everyday scenes and turns them into something meaningful. Pedro blushes slightly at the compliments, grateful and motivated, his confidence shining through as he shares the stories behind each shot. Later that evening, he returns home, prints tucked safely under his arm, heart full of the good energy the community offered him. Miguel places a hand on his shoulder, murmuring his pride. Lucia pours them both a cool drink, listening intently as Pedro describes the feedback he received. Sofia, kneeling on a kitchen chair, leans in, eager to hear every detail. Night falls, and the quiet hum of distant traffic fills the air. Pedro sits on his bed, reviewing his camera's memory card, scrolling through the images of that day. He dreams of doing this professionally, traveling beyond his town's borders, capturing the stories of people around the world. He imagines exhibitions in big galleries, his name printed on small placards, and visitors moved by the scenes he's chosen to preserve. For now, though, his world is this neighborhood, these faces he knows and loves. His camera, always at his side, feels like a trusted friend guiding him toward a brighter future. In this moment, everything seems possible. He's taking the first steps toward his dream, steps lit by the soft glow of a street lamp outside his window and the unwavering support of those who believe in him. Pedro's world shifts dramatically on a clear, warm afternoon when Lucia and Miguel return from the doctor's office bearing heavy news. They gather in the living room, sunlight filtering weakly through the curtains, and invite him to sit. Sofia hovers behind the sofa, quiet and unsure, sensing the tension that crackles in the air. Miguel tries to start gently, but his voice falters. Lucia steps in, her tone steady but sorrowful, explaining that the doctor has discovered a degenerative eye condition, one that will gradually steal the vision Pedro has always relied on. At first, the words don't seem real. They echo in Pedro's ears as if coming from a distant radio station lost in static. This can't be happening. He's only 15. He has an entire future planned out, traveling the world, capturing hidden corners and forgotten faces through his camera lens. How can that future dissolve right here, in the middle of their small living room? He searches Miguel's eyes, hoping for a sign of reassurance. Instead, he sees devastation, barely contained behind lowered lashes and clenched fists. Miguel, always his strongest supporter, looks as if he's just been told his own dreams have withered. Lucia's hand trembles on the armrest, her silence weighed down by sadness she can't quite put into words. Sophia stands still as stone, tears threatening, her small shoulders tensing at the change in the family's atmosphere. Pedro wants to say something, anything, but his throat feels tight. He manages a shaky nod, tries to thank them for telling him, even tries to crack a joke to ease the tension, but no words come. Instead, he heads to his room, his steps leaden. Behind the closed door, he leans against the wall, pressing his palms into his eyes as if he could push away the reality settling into his bones. He thinks of his camera, of the photos waiting on his memory card, of the images he still wants to create. The thought that he may lose the ability to see those details clearly, to frame the light and shadow as he once did, twists inside him like a thorn. In the days that follow, a heavy silence hangs over the household. Lucia tries her best to maintain a sense of normalcy, cooking favorite meals, asking gentle questions, offering hugs, but Pedro can't bring himself to engage. Miguel grows quieter, often disappearing into the workshop out back, where he tinkers with tools and avoids eye contact. Sophia keeps asking if Pedro wants to play board games or go outside, but he shakes his head every time, offering only a half-hearted smile before retreating. Pedro's beloved camera sits untouched on his desk. He can't bear to pick it up. The idea of capturing beauty is painful now, knowing that his world of crisp lines and rich colors may soon blur. He no longer attends the local photo club meetings, missing the vibrant discussions and encouraging nods that once inspired him. Invitations from friends to hang out go unanswered. He lets his phone buzz quietly in the corner, as if ignoring the world could somehow halt the unstoppable progress of his condition. At school, classmates notice his absence from after-school clubs and his distant gaze in class. Some try to ask what's wrong, but Pedro mumbles excuses, never quite admitting what's happening. He doesn't know how to explain it, doesn't know how to accept it himself. Each day brings a new weight on his chest, as if someone has dimmed the light inside him and replaced it with a lingering darkness. As evening falls, he spends hours lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling, 1,000 emotions colliding in his mind, fear of the unknown, sadness for the dreams slipping through his fingers, anger at the unfairness of it all, and a suffocating uncertainty about what the future holds. Would he still be Pedro without photography? Without the gift of sight to guide his composition, to inspire him, to help him understand the world? In these quiet moments, he hears Sophia's soft footsteps outside his door and Lucia and Miguel's hushed whispers in the kitchen. He knows they care, that they're worried, but he can't bring himself to let them in. He's trapped in a storm of emotion and doesn't yet have the words to describe it. Everything feels fragile, as if any attempt at comfort might shatter him completely. And so, Pedro isolates himself further, clinging to the silence that seems safer than facing the truth. Days blend together. He turns down invitations from friends, pulls away from family dinners, and leaves his camera untouched. The once vibrant lens through which he viewed life's simplest wonders now feels like a painful reminder of what he stands to lose. In that darkness, he doesn't yet realize that change, though terrifying, might also lead him down paths he never imagined existed. For now, all he knows is sorrow and uncertainty, holding his breath as he struggles to imagine a world where he can no longer see the details he once cherished. Pedro's world grows darker, both literally and figuratively, as the days pass. His vision blurs further, and with it, his sense of purpose seems to slip through his fingers. The camera that once felt like an extension of his heart now sits silently at the back of his desk drawer, covered by a soft cloth. He can't bring himself to touch it, not when he's convinced it's become a symbol of what he's about to lose. He spends long hours staring listlessly out the window, where the outlines of his neighborhood streets and buildings become less defined each day. He knows that if he tries, he can still make out shapes and colors, but the effort feels like a cruel reminder of what's fading. There's a heaviness inside him he can't put into words, a sense that his life's narrative has been rewritten without his permission. Instead of a story driven by creativity and ambition, it feels like a slow descent into uncertainty. His parents do their best to be present for him. Lucia often sits quietly at the edge of his bed, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, saying nothing if words won't come. Miguel tries to talk about adjustments that can be made, about how technology has come so far and might help Pedro keep photographing. But Pedro is not ready to listen. Every mention of the future feels like an impossible promise, every encouragement like a spotlight shining on what he can't imagine accomplishing now. Sophia is careful, too. She hovers near the doorframe whenever Pedro is in the living room, as if waiting for an invitation to come closer. She misses her brother's enthusiasm, misses how he used to show her his latest shots of sunsets and street art. Now, when she asks him if he wants to look at magazines or listen to their favorite music, he shakes his head no. He's not trying to hurt her, he just can't fake excitement when he feels hollow. Each morning, as the sun attempts to warm their small home, Pedro struggles to leave his bed. He drags himself to school, not because he wants to, but because he feels it's expected. In class, he can barely concentrate. Words on the board blur, classmates' faces lose their sharpness. He forces his mind to focus on something else, maybe the sound of a pen tapping on a desk or a teacher's voice. But these sounds only underscore his growing sense of isolation. Nobody seems to understand what it's like to watch your dreams dissolve in slow motion. The photo club continues without him. He can't bear to enter that room, to feel everyone's pity or curiosity. Friends have texted him, left messages, asked if he's okay. He rarely responds, unsure of what to say. I'm going blind feels too stark, too final. He doesn't know how to share the gravity of his despair without collapsing under its weight. At home, Lucia and Miguel exchange worried glances. They whisper after they think Pedro has gone to sleep, wondering how to help him find a path forward. Lucia suggests seeking out resources for the visually impaired. Miguel considers reaching out to community leaders who might know of support programs. But so far, Pedro hasn't shown any interest in adapting. He's locked in a cycle of sadness and doubt, angry at a world that would give him such a passion and then threaten to take away the very sense he needs to pursue it. Meals become quiet affairs. The clink of forks against plates replaces what once were lively conversations. Pedro often leaves early, saying he's tired or has homework he needs to finish. In truth, he just can't handle the worry etched into his parents' faces. He knows they love him, know they want to help, but their hopefulness feels like another burden. How can they be hopeful when he can't see a shred of it inside himself? As the weeks wear on, Pedro wonders if he should try picking up the camera again, just to see if he can still frame something meaningful. But each time his hand drifts near the desk drawer, panic floods him. What if the photos are blurred beyond recognition? What if this attempt only confirms his worst fears, that he's no longer able to do the one thing he cherished most? In these dark moments, he withdraws even further. He avoids eye contact, keeps his head down in hallways, takes longer routes home to avoid friends. He can't stand the idea of anyone seeing how lost he feels. Depression settles over him like a thick fog, blocking out any light that might hint at a way forward. The idea of continuing to create, to engage with the world through a camera, feels like a cruel joke now. And so, Pedro drifts, day to day, deeper into the shadows of doubt. He's not aware that a flicker of hope will one day cross his path, that new connections and unfamiliar technologies might help him find himself again. In this quiet, difficult time, he only knows the heaviness in his chest and the silence in his soul, certain that the lens of his life has become too dark to ever capture light again. Pedro sits alone in the school's empty courtyard, the distant hum of a lawnmower the only sound filling the late afternoon air. He's resting on a low bench near an old fountain, fingers tracing the chipped paint on its edge. Normally, he'd be at the photo club meeting, but that part of his life feels like it belongs to someone else now. As he's about to leave, footsteps approach from behind, a gentle, even cadence. Pedro, right? The voice is warm, calm. Turning slightly, Pedro sees a man in his 50s, lean and unassuming, wearing a simple button-down shirt. He has kind eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses and carries a camera strapped around his neck. Pedro nods but says nothing, expecting a lecture or pity. Instead, the man sits on the opposite end of the bench, not too close, respecting Pedro's space. "My name's Alejandro," he says, studying the fountain's worn surface. "I've heard about you. You're the young photographer whose work made quite the impression at last year's exhibition, aren't you?" Pedro shrugs, unsure how much this stranger knows about what's changed since then. He wants to say that was before everything fell apart, but he keeps quiet, his eyes on the cracked pavement. "I know you haven't been attending the photo club," Alejandro continues. His tone isn't accusatory, just curious. I'm a photography teacher, new to town, just started helping at the community center. Some folks mentioned your name, told me about your talent. He pauses, then adds softly, also heard about your diagnosis. I'm sorry. Pedro flinches slightly. He expects the usual condolences, the awkward silence that follows. But Alejandro doesn't rush in with sympathy. He waits, letting Pedro feel the quiet moment without pressure. I don't know if I can keep doing it, Pedro finally says, voice low. Photography, I mean. He lifts his gaze for a second. What's the point if I'm losing my sight? Alejandro nods thoughtfully, as if considering a puzzle piece. I understand why you'd feel that way. It's not an easy thing, what you're going through. He taps the camera hanging from his neck, then looks at Pedro again. But photography isn't only about what you see with your eyes. It's also about what you feel, how you interpret the world, how you tell a story through images. Pedro scoffs softly, not out of disrespect, but because it sounds too good to be true. Still, something about Alejandro's steady voice makes him listen. Look, Alejandro continues, leaning forward slightly. There are technologies now that help visually impaired people engage in photography. Adaptive lenses, tactile interfaces, software that describes scenes aloud. It's not the same as before, but it might open new doors for you. He says the words as if describing a known truth, not just a hopeful theory. Pedro's brow furrows. Really? He's never heard of such things. To him, photography has always been about the eye, capturing that fleeting moment of light and shadow. How could he possibly do that if he can't trust his own vision? Alejandro grins, a spark of enthusiasm lighting his expression. Yes, really. I've worked with students who adapt their techniques, who learn to feel the frame through different methods. If you're willing to give it a try, I'd be honored to show you. For a long moment, Pedro is silent. He thinks of his camera at home, neglected and gathering dust. He imagines picking it up again, shaking hands, adjusting knobs and dials. Fear prickles at him, fear of failing, fear of confirming he can't do it. But Alejandro's calm presence and matter-of-fact confidence settle over him like a gentle, reassuring hand on his shoulder. If it doesn't work out, at least you'll know you tried, Alejandro says quietly. But if it does, imagine what stories you could still tell. That night, after dinner, Pedro mentions Alejandro to his family. Lucia's face brightens with cautious optimism. Miguel places a protective arm around Pedro, nodding approval. Sofia grins broadly, happy to see a spark in her brother's eyes. Though Pedro is hesitant to celebrate too soon, he feels a subtle shift inside his chest, a door cracking open where there was once only a wall. Over the following days, Pedro meets with Alejandro at the community center. He's introduced to adaptive tools, a camera with raised buttons and a soft, tactile grid that helps him understand the frame's composition without relying on sight alone. There's also software that whispers gentle descriptions of light and color into an earpiece. At first, it feels clumsy and strange, like learning a new language. But Alejandro is patient, adjusting the devices, guiding Pedro's hands, offering tips rather than orders. Little by little, Pedro starts to believe it might be possible. He holds the camera differently now, listens for cues in the environment, the hum of an old fridge in the corner, the laughter of children passing by, the faint rustle of leaves outside. He learns to trust his other senses, to anticipate a moment before he tries to capture it. It's a different approach, less about perfect clarity and more about emotion, rhythm, and intuition. He takes a few tentative shots, nothing spectacular, but enough to remind him that he's still the one pressing the shutter. It's a small victory. Alejandro nods approvingly, offering constructive feedback. Each session leaves Pedro a bit more hopeful, a bit more curious about what else might be possible. By the end of the week, Pedro brings his camera home again. Lucia and Miguel notice the difference. He's not smiling broadly yet, but there's less heaviness in his gaze. When Sofia peeks at the images he's managed to produce, shapes and silhouettes that carry a gentle narrative, her excitement is palpable. She says they're beautiful, that he's still got it. Pedro doesn't fully believe her yet, but he wants to. In these moments, the fear and doubt haven't vanished, but something new blows quietly beneath them. Alejandro's unwavering support and the existence of these assistive tools have planted a seed of hope. Pedro realizes he might not have to abandon photography after all. He may have to change his approach, adapt, learn a new way of seeing. It won't be easy, but at least now he's willing to try. Pedro arrives at the community center early, eager, and a bit nervous. The room feels different now, less of a reminder of what he lost and more of a workshop where he's forging a new identity as a photographer. Mr. Alejandro greets him with a welcoming nod, and Carlos Martinez, a friend of Alejandro's and a well-known tinkerer in the neighborhood, stands next to a small table spread with curious gadgets. "Glad you could make it, Pedro," Carlos says, his tone warm and casual. He's a few years older than Pedro, maybe in his 20s, and there's a playful spark in his eyes. "I've heard a lot about your talent, and I'm excited to help you figure out how to keep telling your visual stories." On the table, there's a camera with raised, tactile indicators along its edges. A modified lens cap has textured ridges marking the focal length. There's also a small device that, when connected to the camera, whispers voice prompts into an earpiece, descriptions of lighting conditions, approximate distances, even suggestions for composition based on patterns of contrast. A laptop rests beside it, loaded with software designed for the visually impaired, programs that can analyze a photo and describe its elements aloud. Pedro runs his fingers lightly over the tactile camera. It's strange, like learning to read a language of bumps and lines instead of letters. He tries to imagine framing a shot by feel and by sound rather than relying on his eyes. It's intimidating, but Mr. Alejandro and Carlos's calm encouragement gives him strength. They begin with simple exercises. Alejandro describes a still life arrangement on a nearby table, a vase of flowers, a bowl of fruit, and a figurine of a dancing woman. Pedro faces it, listening to the software's gentle voice as it guides him, bright area on the left, darker shape at center. He moves the camera slowly, adjusting angle and tilt using the tactile markers, and snaps a photo. When he reviews it on the laptop, the software describes what the camera captured, and Carlos explains how the objects appear in the frame. It's a messy process at first. The compositions aren't great, the focus is off. But each attempt teaches Pedro something new. He discovers how to gauge distance by the faint hum of the air conditioner, how to find the right angle by noticing how his own shadow falls, how to anticipate movement by listening carefully to footsteps and voices around him. What he loses in sharp visual detail, he starts to compensate for with heightened awareness of sound, texture, and spatial relationships. Carlos occasionally adjusts the software settings, tweaking the voice prompts so they're less distracting. Mr. Alejandro suggests a trick. Imagine the frame as a clock face, with sounds or tactile cues guiding where to place the subject. Pedro tries it, imagining the vase of flowers at 12 o'clock and the fruit bowl at 4, centering them in the frame with surprising accuracy. Each small success is like a spark lighting up a corner of his mind, reminding him that he's learning, adapting, growing. When he takes a break, Pedro steps outside for a moment. The air is warm, and distant laughter drifts from across the street. He closes his eyes, listens to the world around him, and thinks about how his photography might evolve. Perhaps he can focus on shapes and contrasts, on capturing the feeling of a scene rather than its perfect visual detail. Maybe his work will become more abstract, more emotional, and this could set him apart, giving his images a signature style no one else can replicate. Returning inside, Pedro is greeted by Mr. Alejandro's approving smile. Carlos hands him a newly 3D printed grip for the camera, designed to help him hold it steady and navigate its functions more easily. Pedro attaches it carefully and tries another set of shots, this time focusing on people rather than still objects. Elena Ramirez, who works at the center, agrees to stand by a window. Pedro listens to her soft humming, aligns himself with the sound, and uses the voice assistants to gauge the light coming through the glass. He clicks the shutter and then eagerly checks the software's description, a figure outlined by light, standing near a bright rectangular source. It might not be perfect, but it's getting closer. Over the following weeks, Pedro practices constantly. He experiments at home, photographing everyday life in his family's kitchen. Lucia chopping vegetables, Miguel reading the newspaper, Sophia leaning over her notebook as she draws cartoons. He learns to appreciate the gentle rhythm of his family's routine and tries to capture it in subtle ways: a spoon's reflection, the curve of a chair's shadow on the floor, the interplay of voices and laughter that fills the room. With each session, he refines his new method. His hands grow more confident, his mind quicker to interpret the cues. He discovers how to compose images that rely on contrast and shape rather than perfect clarity. It's as if he's learning a new art form altogether, one that still belongs to photography but with its own rules. When he shows the early results to Mr. Alejandro and Carlos, they're impressed by his progress. Carlos jokes that soon Pedro will be teaching him a thing or two. Mr. Alejandro's eyes shine with pride as he pats Pedro's shoulder and says, "You're finding your voice in a new language, and it's coming through beautifully." Encouraged, Pedro tries his hand at more complex scenes: a busy street corner, with bicycles passing and street vendors calling out prices. He leans on the voice-assisted software to identify where the brightest patches of light are, listens for the clattering of wheels and footsteps, and times his shot. The resulting image, though not crystal clear in traditional terms, has a unique energy: figures caught mid-stride, the sense of motion conveyed through shifting shadows and vague outlines. It feels alive, honest, and undeniably his. By the time he finishes his practice for the day, Pedro's determination and resilience have only grown stronger. He might not see as he once did, but he's seeing differently now, through a blend of technology, intuition, and creativity. His heart swells with a sense of purpose. He's not defined by his condition, he's defined by his response to it, by his refusal to give up on what he loves. That night, as Pedro lies in bed, he recalls the day's lessons. He thinks about the future again, not with dread but with cautious optimism. Photography still belongs to him, just in a new form. He'll keep refining, keep pushing, and keep learning to capture the world's beauty on his own terms. Pedro wakes early, the morning air cool against his face as he steps outside. He's chosen this hour deliberately. Before the streets fill with chatter and commerce, before the bakery's aromas flood the corners and bicycle bells chime, there's a gentle hush that he hopes to capture in his images. He stands on the sidewalk, camera in hand, the tactile modifications beneath his fingertips guiding him. He's ready to embark on a new project, a series of photographs that will celebrate the heart of his community, preserving the quiet grace of everyday life as it unfolds around him. His goal is ambitious: to create a collection that highlights the beauty in simple things, the softened glow of dawn on old brick walls, a pair of neighbors exchanging friendly greetings, a child chasing a stray balloon. He knows he can't rely solely on sight now. Instead, he listens, senses subtle changes in the environment, and uses the assistive software that whispers details into his ear. It's a dance between what he remembers visually and what he's learning to interpret through other cues. He starts near the plaza, where a street vendor sets up her stall. He can hear the rustle of her apron, the gentle clink of bottles. With careful timing, he captures the suggestion of her silhouette against the rising sun. The photo, when analyzed later, will have a quiet poetry, an interplay of shapes and faint textures that speaks to the warmth and dedication of a working morning. As the day progresses, Pedro moves through the streets, pausing at a family-owned grocery store, then a small park where a group of schoolchildren gather near an old fountain. He takes his time. He's not here to rush or force a perfect shot. He's here to be present, to immerse himself in the rhythms of his neighborhood and trust his new methods. Sometimes he snaps a photo based on a distinctive sound, a creaky gate, a distant laugh. Other times, he feels the shift of light on his skin and knows it's time to press the shutter. Back at the community center, he reviews his work using the adaptive software, listening carefully as the program describes each image. Mr. Alejandro stands beside him, offering a quiet smile and the occasional suggestion. Pedro can hardly contain his excitement as he discovers that despite his visual limitations, he's captured moments filled with emotion and story. There's a candid shot of two friends sharing pastries, their faces blurred but their body language affectionate. There's a scene with a stray cat perched on a windowsill, caught just as the sun touches its whiskers. Each image holds a gentle narrative, a testament to Pedro's evolving artistry. Word starts to spread. Alejandro shares a few samples with other photography enthusiasts, and Carlos Martinez mentions Pedro's name to a local blogger who writes about inclusive art practices. Soon, people are curious: Who is this photographer experimenting with tactile cues and voice-assisted tools to produce such evocative work? When Lucia and Miguel learn that people are asking about Pedro's project, they beam with pride. Sofia, practically bouncing with excitement, offers to help Pedro select images for a small online gallery. Together, they sort through the photos, and though Pedro can't see them as he once could, he trusts their reactions, the soft gasp from Sofia when she sees an especially beautiful frame, the gentle wow that escapes Lucia's lips, the quiet awe in Miguel's voice as he realizes that Pedro's dream is alive and thriving. Encouraged, Pedro posts a short series online, explaining in a brief caption how he's adapting his methods to continue his passion despite losing much of his sight. He doesn't know what to expect, maybe a handful of supportive comments from friends and family. But within days, his inbox fills with messages from strangers who are inspired by his resilience and creativity. A local journalist reaches out, wanting to interview him. Someone from a nearby art collective invites him to participate in a community showcase. The recognition feels surreal. Pedro's confidence, once buried under layers of doubt and sadness, begins to rise like a growing tide. He realizes he's not just surviving his condition, he's thriving within it, finding a way to do what he loves on his own terms. His heart swells with gratitude for Mr. Alejandro, who believed in him and guided him toward these new tools. He thinks of Carlos Martinez's patient tinkering and the unwavering support of his family, each of whom played a part in lighting his path forward. As the project continues, Pedro becomes bolder, trying more complex compositions, venturing into busier parts of town. He experiments with capturing the rush of the marketplace at noon or the hushed lamplight of late-night cafes. Every successful image, every piece of positive feedback, reaffirms that he is still a photographer, an artist who can tell meaningful stories, perhaps now even more unique than before. One afternoon, after uploading a new set of photos, Pedro sits at his desk, hands resting lightly on his camera. He reflects on how far he's come. Only a short time ago, he doubted he'd ever feel comfortable taking pictures again. Now, he's showcasing images that celebrate the soul of his community, and people are listening, looking, and learning from his perspective. This renewed purpose and growing confidence don't erase the difficulty of his situation. He still faces frustration and moments of sadness when he remembers what he once took for granted. But he's carving out a new identity, one defined not by what he's lost, but by what he's discovered in himself. In capturing light through these new lenses, Pedro is illuminating not only his surroundings, but also the strength and creativity he carries within. Pedro's camera rests snugly in his hands as he stands in the community center's main hall, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. A local exhibition is just days away, a showcase that promises to bring together various talents from around town. Pedro's photographs, captured through his new adaptive methods, have been carefully selected and prepared for display. He wants them to speak for themselves, to show that he can still create moving, meaningful images, even if the world looks different to him now. But not everyone believes in him. In hushed corners, he's overheard skeptical whispers from a few community members. They doubt that someone who can't fully rely on his sight can possibly excel behind a camera. Some question if his recent work is a fluke, suspecting pity rather than skill as the reason he's been invited to exhibit. Others grumble that this is a photography show, after all, and how can a photographer thrive without perfect vision? These murmurs sting, though Pedro tries not to let them sink too deep. He's no stranger to doubt, but this time he refuses to be defined by it. He reminds himself of how far he has come. He thinks of Mr. Alejandro's patient guidance, the technological adaptations Carlos Martinez introduced, the unwavering support from Lucia, Miguel, and Sofia. He recalls the messages from strangers online who found hope in his journey. All of these voices cheer him on, outshining the negativity. Still, the doubts gnaw at the edges of his confidence. He confides in Mr. Alejandro after a particularly tough day, when he overheard a man in the plaza scoffing at the idea of a nearly blind photographer. Alejandro listens quietly, then places a hand on Pedro's shoulder. "People may question what they don't understand," he says gently. "It's up to you to show them what's possible. Let your work be your response." He shares these worries with Elena Ramirez too, the friendly staff member at the community center who helped him refine his techniques. Elena encourages him, reassuring that truth and talent shine through adversity. Remember, she says, your photos aren't about proving anyone wrong. They're about expressing who you are. Your love of capturing life, your unique perspective, that's what people will see. The week before the exhibition is a flurry of preparation. Pedro selects the images that best represent his voice, portraits of the vendor with her gentle smile, silhouettes of children playing in half-light, quiet street scenes that hum with everyday magic. He uses the assistive software to ensure the prints are correctly labeled and mounted, each description checked and rechecked. His family helps frame them, carefully securing each piece, handling them as if they were precious heirlooms. Miguel, who once struggled with his son's diagnosis, now speaks proudly of Pedro's talent to anyone who will listen. Lucia radiates quiet pride as she watches her son navigate a new world of possibilities. Sophia, unable to contain her excitement, clings to Pedro's arm the morning of the exhibition's opening. "You're gonna be great," she insists, her voice bubbly with confidence. "When people see your work, they'll understand what I've known all along, that my brother is an incredible artist." As the exhibition begins, the hall fills with visitors. The scent of fresh paint and polished floors mingles with voices and soft music. Pedro stands near his display, listening attentively as people approach, curious and intrigued. At first, they come for the novelty, to see if a visually impaired photographer's work could possibly hold merit. But once they gaze at the images, something shifts. The photos tell stories of his community's everyday wonders in a way that feels intimate and genuine, focusing on mood and atmosphere rather than perfect clarity. Some shots highlight contrasting shapes and shadows, others rely on subtle cues of motion and sound that Pedro has learned to interpret. He overhears gasps of appreciation, soft murmurs of surprise. A few who were once skeptical now find themselves drawn in, impressed by the raw emotion captured in each frame. Someone steps forward to congratulate him, another visitor compliments the unique style, noting how the images feel less like static pictures and more like windows into living scenes. A local photographer, initially one of the skeptics, admits he was wrong. "I underestimated you," he says quietly, shaking Pedro's hand. "Your work has heart. It's honest. That's what matters, not just how you get the shot." Pedro's chest warms with relief and happiness. He holds onto the camera at his side, remembering the doubts that nearly stopped him from picking it up again. Here, surrounded by appreciative viewers, he finds validation, not just as a photographer who's adapting to new challenges, but as an artist whose vision extends beyond eyesight. Throughout the evening, Mr. Alejandro and Elena beam proudly, exchanging knowing glances that say, "We knew he could do this." Lucia and Miguel watch from a short distance, arms around each other, as their son stands confidently by his exhibit. Sophia flits around excitedly, telling anyone who'll listen that these images were captured by her brother, who never gave up even when the world changed on him. By the time the exhibition draws to a close, Pedro has proven his capabilities to the community and, more importantly, to himself. The barriers he faced, both external and internal, haven't disappeared, but he's broken through the doubt that once held him back. In doing so, he's created something meaningful, something that belongs to him alone. As he packs up his equipment and gently slips his camera into its case, Pedro thinks about what lies ahead. He's no longer defined by what he can't do, but by what he can achieve with determination, creativity, and the support of those who believe in him. And that, he realizes, is the truest form of vision, an unwavering belief in the light that still shines inside him. Pedro steps onto the small stage at the local cultural center, a modest spotlight illuminating him as he addresses a room filled with familiar faces and eager newcomers. His recent success at the exhibition has propelled him into the spotlight, and now he's here not just as an artist, but as a mentor and advocate for others who share similar challenges. His camera hangs at his side, a symbol of his journey, and the anticipation in the air is palpable. He begins speaking softly, voice steady, describing his own path with honesty and warmth. He explains how losing his sight didn't mean losing his vision. Instead, it led him down a different route, one illuminated by innovation, determination, and faith in his own creativity. Pedro's words resonate deeply with his audience, many of whom have disabilities of their own. Some are visually impaired teenagers clutching notebooks, others are curious adults who want to understand how he defied expectations. He reminds them that art doesn't require perfect eyesight, just a passionate heart and a willingness to adapt. After his talk, a small group gathers around him. A young girl named Angela, partially blind since birth, timidly asks Pedro how he finds confidence when the world seems daunting. He kneels beside her, their conversation quiet and encouraging. He assures her that her perspective is invaluable, that she can learn to shape it into something meaningful. Another attendee, Manuel, worried that his poor vision would limit his photography, finds reassurance as Pedro explains the assistive tools he's learned to use. He offers practical tips, but also emphasizes something more important, believing in oneself, even when circumstances change. In the following weeks, Pedro starts informal workshops. He meets regularly with Angela, Manuel, and others who are curious about adaptive photography. They gather at the community center's multi-purpose room, now affectionately referred to as their studio, and experiment with tactile cameras, audio descriptions, and new software that Carlos Martinez helps set up. Mr. Alejandro drops by occasionally, proud to see that the teacher's role he once held now gracefully passes to Pedro. Elena Ramirez offers supportive smiles and a helping hand, seeing how Pedro's confidence has grown, enabling him to guide others toward their own paths of creative expression. Under Pedro's mentorship, these young individuals begin to find their own methods of capturing the world. Some discover that they prefer focusing on textures and shapes, others are drawn to soundscapes and subtle movements. Pedro watches their progress with a quiet joy that surpasses any recognition he's received for his own work. In helping them see what's possible, he reaffirms his own strength and purpose. The community takes notice. A local journalist writes a feature on Pedro's mentorship program, praising his efforts to empower young artists who refuse to be defined by their disabilities. Invitations arrive from neighboring towns, and even a regional arts organization asks if Pedro would consider hosting a session at their upcoming festival. Each opportunity feels like another door opening, another chance to prove that creativity transcends limitations. Lucia and Miguel beam with pride as they see their son embracing his new role. Sophia boasts to her classmates that her brother isn't just a photographer, he's a trailblazer. Pedro, though honored by the praise, stays grounded. He remembers the early days of despair and confusion, how he felt lost and unsure if he could ever hold a camera again. Now, that past fuels his empathy for the newcomers who look up to him, who stand in the position he once occupied. He tells them, you can transform what feels like a loss into a different kind of gift. His own photography continues to flourish as well. With each new project, he refines his methods, infusing his images with layers of emotion and nuance. He experiments with portraying not just physical scenes, but the mood, rhythm, and spirit of a place. His photos become known for their evocative atmosphere, a style uniquely shaped by his sensory approach. His work sells at small galleries, and he receives commissions to document local cultural events. His career is taking shape, steady, promising, and on his own terms. As the months pass, Pedro's legacy begins to form. He is no longer just a teenager who struggled with losing his sight. He's an artist whose journey inspires others to challenge their own assumed limits. New friendships blossom in the studio sessions as visually impaired teens swap techniques and encourage one another. Pedro watches proudly as Angela captures a photo that earns her a special mention at a school competition. Manuel assembles a small portfolio that he shares with his family, their reaction bringing tears to his eyes. On a warm afternoon, Pedro strolls through his hometown. The once familiar streets are now mapped in a mixture of memory and newfound perception. He listens to the laughter echoing in the plaza, inhales the scent of fresh bread wafting from a bakery, notices how the breeze shifts through a line of trees. He might not see them clearly, but he feels their presence as vividly as ever, translating sensory impressions into the language of his art. Looking ahead, Pedro envisions a future filled with creative endeavors. He dreams of traveling to new places, capturing the essence of different cultures, and sharing his adaptive methods with other aspiring artists around the world. He anticipates collaborating with designers to improve assistive technologies, making them more accessible so that no aspiring photographer has to surrender their dream. He contemplates writing a book or creating online tutorials, extending his mentorship to anyone who needs a guiding hand. In these reflections, Pedro acknowledges everyone who supported him, the loving encouragement of his family, the mentorship of Mr. Alejandro, the technical expertise of Carlos, and the kindness of Elena. He understands that while he faced a daunting challenge, he did not face it alone. Their voices echo in his mind, a chorus of faith and hope that helped him rediscover his passion. As Pedro lifts his camera, tilting it toward a scene he wants to record, he feels no anger or bitterness about what he's lost. Instead, he carries gratitude for what he's gained, resilience, understanding, and a renewed sense of purpose. He has become a beacon for others, illuminating paths that once seemed hidden in darkness. His story, now woven into the fabric of his community, will continue to guide those who come after him, proving that art and heart are more powerful than any limitation. Pedro stands on a modest wooden stage in the community center's auditorium, a space now familiar and dear to him. The lights are low, the room filled with soft murmurs of anticipation. Tonight is a celebration, not just of his work, but of the many young voices he's helped nurture along the way. On the walls hang photographs taken by emerging photographers he has mentored, vibrant collages of everyday life, textured images that whisper stories of resilience, laughter, and quiet moments of human connection. He steps forward, his camera resting comfortably at his side, more a companion than a tool. The audience falls silent as Pedro begins to speak. He doesn't focus on his own achievements, though they're many. He shares stories of Angela, who once doubted her abilities but now confidently experiments with new angles and techniques. He mentions Manuel, who found his own style in capturing subtle movements and gentle contrasts. He points out that each student's journey enriches the community's artistic tapestry, forging a collective vision that transcends traditional notions of sight. He speaks of the mentors who shaped his path. He thanks Mr. Alejandro, whose calm encouragement and belief in adaptive technology opened new doors. He mentions Carlos Martinez, who painstakingly worked with software and devices to help Pedro find a new way of seeing. He acknowledges Elena Ramirez, who supported the workshops and helped create a welcoming environment for all who dared to try something new. He pays tribute to his family, Lucia's gentle strength, Miguel's quiet pride, and Sophia's boundless enthusiasm, each of them a steady presence during times of fear and uncertainty. As Pedro's voice carries through the room, he feels the warmth of gratitude flowing through him. He understands that no one's journey is undertaken alone. His achievements are woven from the threads of collective effort, trust, and love. Here, at the cusp of his future, he recognizes that every setback he endured, every doubt he overcame, now serves as a beacon for others. He once thought darkness would close in on him, but he's learned that light can come from unexpected places, an idea, a helping hand, a willingness to adapt. After the speech, the hall lights brighten gradually. People wander among the displayed photographs, discussing the subtle textures, the emotional resonance, and the unexpected angles. A local journalist commends the mentoring program for its innovative approach. A teacher from a neighboring town asks Pedro if he'd consider bringing his workshops there. A family who traveled from a few cities away tells him that his story inspired their child, who has a similar condition, to pick up a camera for the first time. Pedro steps down from the stage and blends into the crowd, chatting and listening, delighted to see how his legacy takes root in conversations and sparks of interest. He understands now that his influence will continue to spread, rippling outward as more individuals discover their ability to shape the world with their art, regardless of the challenges they face. Each photograph, each mentorship session, each word of encouragement adds a little more brightness to the collective lens through which everyone sees life. Before leaving, he slips out into the evening air for a quiet moment under the stars. It's late, and the town is softly lit by street lamps and distant laughter. He closes his eyes, feeling the subtle changes in the breeze, the distant hum of a passing car. He smiles, picturing the future, exhibitions, workshops, maybe even creating adaptive photography curricula for schools. He imagines the young artists he's helped growing confident, forging their own styles, telling their own truths through images. With each breath, Pedro knows he's forged not just a career, but a lasting impact. His legacy isn't limited to photographs on a wall, it's alive in the minds and hearts of those he's touched. His path, once so fraught with uncertainty, now glows with promise and purpose. He lifts his camera and takes a final mental snapshot of this moment, a personal milestone marked by hope, gratitude, and the knowledge that what he's built will outlast him, inspiring others long after tonight's applause fades. He turns back toward the community center, where new voices await him, new artists ready to learn, and new horizons yet to be discovered. His journey continues, guided not by perfect sight, but by a radiant vision of what art, support, and resilience can achieve when woven together with love. Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and your name. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you never miss our next inspiring story. Together, let's keep shining a light on the champions among us.